भवत्येदनुभावादेड मुकोऽपि वाग्मी जडमतिरपि जन्तुर्जायते प्राज्ञमौलिः सकलवचनचेतो देवता भारती सा मम वचसि निधत्तां सन्निधिं मानसे च आपादमौलिपर्यन्तं गुरूणाम् आकृतिं स्मरेत् तेन विघ्नाः प्रणश्यन्ति सिद्ध्यन्ति च मनोरथाः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः. Okay, so the topic that has been given to me for today's, like, how much time do I have? Now this is 5:41 now. 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Srinidhi Achar, how much time do I have?
Everyone are requested to be on mute, so we can be audible clearly.
Srinidhi Achar, I was asking a question. How much time do I have? Like 30
yes,
minutes,
you can
40
continue
minutes?
Till 6:20, 25.
6:20. Okay. Okay. So maybe we can have a few questions if
yes,
people
yes.
are interested at the end of it. Okay. Okay. See, if any one of you have any questions in between, feel free to just type it in the chat box or raise your hand and let me know. I mean, we can actually make it a dialogue, interactive, rather than making it a boring monologue. Okay. So the topic that has been given to me today is the scientific approach of Sriman Madhvacharya in his philosophical development, right? Okay, so let me just set a prelude of what I think I'm going to present today. Just an overview of this talk, and then we'll go to the details of it. See, don't expect me to tell you some of the incidental physics or mathematical thoughts that Acharya said in his works. No, that is not what I'm going to tell you today, because there are multiple things that people do it, and my personal view is that if you find some so-called modern science incidentally in some of these previous works, classical ancient works of our Indian heritage, that is just a coincidence, and people would have done it because they want it for some other purpose. So the objective of Indian philosophical text is not to, I mean, it's very emphatically saying it is not to pursue the material world as today's science do. Okay, so I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to show you that okay, this is something pertaining to quantum physics exists in Madhvacharya's works and all that. I'm not interested in doing it. But what I'll be doing today is see, there is something called a scientific approach. Okay, so we all talk of everything being scientific, right? I mean, whenever somebody is asked to do a simple ritual, right? I mean, all of our children, today's youth, ask this question: do you have some scientific proof behind it? Everybody talks of science without even knowing what the definition of science is and how is science developed and what do we actually mean by science. Everybody is a scientist today, and everything that is scientific is taken to be gospel, right? Nobody questions science, which is against the very concept of science. Science actually is based on the principles of questioning, and whenever people say that this has some scientific background or scientific, so-called scientific proof, I mean, whatever nonsense it means, people just take it with the face value. For example, today people want scientific reasons to for having some kind of tilaka, or they want scientific reasons to wear bangles and all kinds of nonsense, right? I mean, my personal view and opinion, humble opinion, is that there is no scientific, so-called scientific reasons for all that. So that is not what I'll be doing. However, science is not one person's view, okay, and it is not Western thought that is called as scientific. So anything systematic, any systematic knowledge building exercise is generally referred to as science. Okay, see, now my claim is, today my claim is the philosophical treatment and the development that Sri Madhvacharya followed when he presented his thoughts, his hypothesis in all of his works put together, is as scientific or perhaps more scientific than the science that you can think of, than any science that you can think of. Just give you an analogy. If you look at the principle of Mathematica, which is the magnum opus of Newton, right? Let me just get my facts correct. So Principia of Mathematica, right? Yeah. Yeah, so Principia Mathematica is this magnum opus by Newton, where he put in a lot of his ideas, where his theory of the famous theory of motion of Newton is also proposed. So if you look at that book, as in if you call that as scientific, and the work by say Oppenheimer or even Einstein as scientific, then I mean I would claim that that the work that the Sri Madhvacharya has put together as body of work, body of literature that he has collated, which is famously referred to as the Sarvamoola Granthas, they are as scientific as any other work that you may deem as scientific. That is my claim. So let me give you, with this claim, I shall give you a few instances of why, which would back up my hypothesis, my claim that Sri Madhvacharya's development of philosophy is scientific. Okay, I'll give you a few instances and a few pointers from his work. Okay, which I think will support my claim that his work is scientific. Okay, so that is what the objective of this talk is going to be. Okay, so with that, let us take this fundamental question. What do you mean by scientific? You can just look at a few definitions of what is scientific, and there is this famous definition from Galileo, who defined what science is. Okay, so science basically, comprises of understanding things around you, right, and developing a precise and putting things that, see, he says that first you start with an observation, okay, then you go to then you make a hypothesis, and based on that hypothesis then you infer, right? In fact, it's the other way around. You start with a hypothesis, right, then you observe. The observation is synonymous to experimentation. You make a hypothesis, which is your claim, and then you make some observations, and then you deduce the inference, and you keep doing this cycle, and this is what is known as the so-called scientific approach, right? So to give you an example, so what we do in laboratory in laboratories as students of science is that we make a hypothesis. We say that, okay, the electrons have these many subatomic particles. Atom has these many subatomic particles, or sort of electromagnetic. A few electromagnetic waves have this much of spectrum, and this is the wavelength, this is the frequency, and so on. We can make any hypothesis. And once we make a hypothesis, we test that hypothesis in our laboratories through experimentations. Okay, so that's what you do. You first you make a hypothesis, which is your claim, which is just based on your hunch and a few not so solid evidences. Then you look for evidences to back up your claim, which is known as the experimentation. And once you do a lot of experimentation, you come to a conclusion which you call as inference. So what happens is, when you make a hypothesis, at that stage it is called a theory. Okay, so once a theory is backed up with solid evidence, which is the observations, then it is called a law, right? So that is why in scientific language you hear these two terms. Some of the things are called theories, and some of the things are called laws. Okay, so gravitational law, but the relativity theory is a theory, because you don't have the observational or empirical evidence to it. And then you make an inference based on your observations. So based on your observations, you change your hypothesis, because suppose you make a hypothesis, okay, your observation might point to a different direction compared to what your hypothesis is. So which means that your initial hypothesis can be wrong. So based on the observed evidence, you change your hypothesis, and then based on that you conduct enough experimentations and keep changing your hypothesis and be in that loop. And once you have solid evidence that does not contradict with each other, then you infer and make it a law. Okay, so any a system of knowledge, okay, so which follows roughly these kinds of this kind of path in establishing their claim is called as scientific. That is one definition which is kind of agreed upon with by a lot of people across the globe. Now with this, so what happens, we have to see this kind of an approach, this kind of an approach in what Madhvacharya did in his philosophy. Okay, let's try to do that. See, now I'm assuming that the audience here have a fair idea of what he proposed in his philosophy, which is actually not of much consequence here, because you have other speakers that are talking in this series who will tell you what contributions he made in terms of actual philosophical tenets. Okay, I'll not go to that. But now when he made those contributions, okay, so what I'm interested in is, and I'm going to show you that while he was making such contributions, he followed whatever the so-called scientific method that I just described. Okay, that is my objective. So let us start. Let us look at a few examples, and I'll show a few few instances of it. So see, this talk that I'm giving right now can also be seen as one way of putting my thoughts in a scientific method. So I made a claim, right? My initial claim was that the presentation, I mean the ideas that Sri Madhvacharya has proposed fit well into the realm of scientific methods. Okay, that's my claim. So to justify that claim, I'll have to make some observations, right, and give you some evidence. And based on that evidence, it is for you to make inference, whether my claim is correct or not. If my claim is wrong, you should come back and change my claim and so on. Okay. So let's begin. So one, very big thing that Madhvacharya did was, though he claims himself to be coming from the school of Vaidikas, right? His starting point is always experience. Okay, so he says nahi pratyaksha siddham manyena kenapi badhyam drishtam. So what he says is, start your philosophy. So one of the very big tenets of Madhvacharya is that build all your philosophy based on your experience and observations, but not the other way around. Okay, so a lot of philosophers across the globe, what they did was, so they looked at the existing evidence in terms of the Vedic texts. Okay, so they took the truth value of Vedic text to be non-fallible. They thought that whatever Vedas have said is absolutely true, which is indeed the fact. Okay, I'll come to that in a while. And they went to such an extent where to protect the apparent meaning of the Vedic text, they started tweaking the way one is observing. Okay, see, all the experiences and the observations that we as individuals make. So they started saying, the philosophy was built in such a way that it would contradict the experience. What they say is, okay, it's true that there are experiences, but the experience might not be the final verdict. However, Madhvacharya in his philosophy, he does the exact opposite, where he starts building philosophy from experience. So he says that there's no way that one can question experience. He says, Sakshi siddhe tu asamshayat. Okay, nahi kaschit sukhadyeshu samshayam kurute janaha. Nacha akilamanani nischino tekelo janaha. So he says that whatever your experience is, okay, the core experience of an individual is something that can be taken as axiom. Don't take the textual evidence as axiom, but you start with experience and build your philosophy on top of it, right? So this is what the science is, right? I mean, you make a hypothesis and you then conduct a lot of experiments. So now if your experimental evidence is pointing contrary to what your hypothesis is, rather if your hypothesis is pointing contrary to what your experimental outcomes are, it's a matter of common experience that scientists go back and change their hypothesis. This is how science works today. So I'll give you an example. So before I think Einstein came, early 18th, 19th century, people believed in a theory called corpuscular theory, because they wanted to explain a lot of properties of light. Okay, light was behaving like a particle at times, and it was behaving like a wave at others. So to explain this, people thought that there is ether that is pervading all around the universe, and the basis for it was the corpuscular theory. So then Einstein came, and there were conducted a few experiments, where he proposed the dual nature of light, where he said, in fact, a lot of people think that Einstein got his Nobel Prize because of theory of relativity, which is not the case. He got his Nobel Prize because of his work on the particle nature of light. That's why he got his Nobel. That's on which he got his Nobel Prize. Anyway, so after he proposed that idea, people said, I mean, all the scientific fraternity said that, okay, all all the while we were thinking that there is ether and corpuscles everywhere in the universe, and this all the observations and evidences point contrary to our hypothesis. Now let us go back and change our hypothesis. This is how science works. Now, this is precisely what Madhvacharya does. Okay, so he says that start from experience and see if the textual evidence, no matter how how infallible that is, go back to it and see if it is contradicting your experience. Right? If it is, then reinterpret the text. Okay, so isn't it scientific? This is as scientific as it can get. So I can give you concrete examples, but as I told you, I'll not go to that. I'll not take that route because I'm just looking at scratching the surface, where I'll show you that the approach is scientific rather than giving you precise examples of why it is so. Okay, so maybe very quickly I'll give you the one example. Just mention one example. The famous the Tattvamasi Vakyartha, right? In Chandogya Upanishad, where he says that, see, text, as we all know, is subject for interpretation, right? I mean, you don't have to take the face value. You can always go back and reinterpret the text which suits your experience, but never do the other way around. Okay, so now don't start at the text and take its face value and tweak your experience. It cannot be done. Okay, so this is one very, and this is something that I've very deeply admired about him, that he always starts with experience and tweaks everything else, every other evidence else according to experience. If something contradicts to experience, you just change your other evidence, notwithstanding its truth value, to suit your experience. Is one thing that I have observed and I've admired a lot. Now, one might, this leads to organically leads to this following question. Okay, you said that everything starts with experience, and you have to base your hypothesis based on experience and tweak your hypothesis based on experience. Okay, but you cannot randomly change text, you see, right? I mean, if a text is saying that something exists, right, you can't change the text to mean that it doesn't exist. I mean, even though you can do it in Sanskrit. Dr. Srinidhi knows that all it takes in Sanskrit is a dirgha. One matra is all it takes to change the meaning from positive to negative, right? This very famous example is of the Tattvamasi, where the Shankaracharya makes the interpretation. I mean, makes a padacheda as sa atma tat tvamasi, and Madhvacharya just adds a dirgha, which is perfectly valid according to Vyakarana, where he makes this interpretation of sa atma atatvamasi shvetaketu. So it is, even though it is possible, but let's not take that route. It is, I mean, suppose there is a text that is given. Let's take a situation where you are given a text, okay, a Vedic text whose truth value cannot be questioned, because it's everybody takes it with an axiomatic value that anything that Veda says is true. Okay, so now let's say that there is a text that is saying something, and your experience is completely contradicting that. Now, there is a certain extent to which you can reinterpret your text, but not beyond beyond a limit, because if it says something positive, you can't make it negative, and vice versa. So now, how does Madhvacharya deal with this problem is the question. Again, let's go to the scientific approach. See, when we present our findings, scientific findings in peer-reviewed international journals and international fora, see, one thing that is taught and that is very rigorously followed in scientific fraternity is that we never make a claim without giving an evidence. Okay, so our evidence, it would either be previously published work, right, or it is our own experimental evidence. Okay, so one thing that we all pass on generation after generation to our students is that never ever make a single claim without giving an evidence. Okay, so an established evidence. Okay, see, now, as I told you, so now philosophy is built upon experience. So now you start with experience and you build a philosophy. So now what do you mean by building a philosophy? You take the text that you take as truth and tweak your text, or reinterpret. Let me not use the word tweak. You reinterpret your text in such a way that it is in sync with the experience. Okay. Now, when you reinterpret it, okay, so I mean, Acharya Madhva is extremely creative in doing all this. He does it at multiple times. But what is astonishing about his work is, anybody who has gone through his work has this experience, that he never makes a single claim without giving an evidence. Okay, so people question the authenticity of his evidence. A lot of the evidence that he has presented, unfortunately, is not available in current text because we have lost it. Now that's a different topic altogether. Albeit, every single claim that he makes, every single claim that he makes, he backs it up with an evidence. He says that has been said here. He gives an evidence, a textual evidence, most of the cases. He also gives other kinds of pratyaksha kind of evidences also at times. In fact, this actually makes me remember a very nice quote that his direct disciple says. Acharya Madhva's direct disciple, Sri Trivikrama Panditacharya, says the following in his Tattva Pradipika. He says that in his work, in his magnum opus Brahma Sutra Bhashya, Acharya says something and gives an evidence, says something, gives an evidence, and so on. He says that there is no need for him to do this, because I don't want to take names, but if you look at other philosophers, the way they present their ideas, they do present their ideas well. That's not the issue, but seldom they give evidences. Okay, it's not always that every single thing that they say is backed up with an evidence. But Acharya Madhva, very, very rarely. I mean, I would say it's almost 99 out of 100 times, whatever he says, he backs it up with an evidence. This is I was talking about Trivikrama Panditacharya. He says Acharya Madhva need not do this, because let him say something. People who believe will believe. People who don't believe will not believe. Right? As simple as that. Okay. So nowhere in any of the philosophical texts you see this kind of a trend where a philosopher makes a claim and he backs it up with evidence, but he does that. See, this backing up with an evidence, the later Vyakhyanakaras will do, because they always look at the Bhashyakara to do this. But a Bhashyakara himself doing this is very, very rare. And now that is, as I told you, it is very, very scientific, because that is what today's scientific fraternity we do. Because when we write a scientific article, right, oftentimes when peers review it, they'll say that, okay, you have missed this citation because this was the previous work that you have missed, and this is a citation that you should have mentioned. So that's a very, very well established scientific practice across the world, and he does it very, very abundantly in his work. Right. So that is one. In fact, very interestingly, people who have looked at his work know that he speaks very less. Brevity is one other thing that I have observed in his writing style, which is again very scientific. You should not speak a lot, right? I mean, when you are rigorously presenting an idea, you present it very rigorously, just by evidence, and whatever points you need to make, just make it and be silent. There's no need to keep on saying things without backing up with evidence. He's so brief in presenting his ideas, which is again, I think that it is very scientific, being brief. Not only that, when he writes his bhashyas, right, I mean his commentaries on different texts, he only in lot of times, right, I mean he keeps on citing evidences. He doesn't even write any of his own text. For example, if you look at the commentary, the bhashya that he has written to the Bhagavatam, which is the Bhagavata Tatparya Nirnaya, it's very seldom that you find his own writings. 80 to 90% of the text is only citations, where he just gives citations from different other sources of Vedavyasa and other Vedic texts and so on. And he composes his entire bhashya just on citations. Isn't that wonderful? It's a very beautiful thing, that's so-called scientific that I've seen. The other aspects that one can observe in his style of philosophical development and his works is his fearlessness. Okay, so I mean he's so fearless in saying that nahi pratyaksha siddham anyena kenapi badhyam drishtam. He says, see, examine your experience. Okay, so he's not fearful that when historically, if you observe, when he proposed his philosophy, there was a lot of resistance, because whenever a rebel comes, it is not confined to him. When Shankaracharya came, Adi Shankaracharya came, there was a lot of resistance, because there was so much of Buddhist influence all over the country, and he had to face that same resistance. And when Madhvacharya came, it was more so, because it is so radically different from what is around. Okay, so when that much of resistance was faced, he is absolutely not fearful in not only, you know, deviating from the existing philosophy, but also putting forward theories that are apparently not very what should I say, you know, very appealing to the masses. Okay, so let me give you this example, and I know that this is going to be a little controversial, but let me do it because it will be injustice if I don't do it. Give me a second, it's on my light. Okay, so, you know, people often criticize the idea of individuality of souls that Srimad Madhvacharya has put forward, right? You know, the so-called Jiva Traividya and all that. You know, people criticize that he's being divisive and all that. However, if you look at it very carefully, you know, one can understand that it's such a central idea to explain, you know, so many things, you know, so many observations that we see around. Okay, no matter how non-appealing or, you know, how non-political it might sound, he did not fear by saying it. You know, he says this is what the reality is. So, I mean, you accepting, you know, anybody accepting or not accepting the reality doesn't change the reality, right? Only a true philosopher or only a true scientist doesn't hesitate by saying the true the truth, right? So, I mean, he never bothered about being politically correct. You know, he never shied away from saying truth, no matter how bitter it might sound. Okay, so he says bhaved diboksho niyatam surana maiva suranam sa katham chana syat. So he makes such bold statements, which is again, you know, you should not forget what I just said for 30 minutes before, that when he makes these statements, it is not, you know, blanket baseless statements. He gives so much of solid evidences to back up his claim, but he does not shy away from making uh, statements, and the statements that are not politically correct for today's the political views. So not shying away from truth is one other scientific temperament that I have seen multiple times. Anybody can see it in his works, that he never shies away from saying truth, no matter how bitter it is. Right. So coming to this angle of not shying away from things. See, the other thing, you know, that you can see is that he welcomes challenges. Okay, that is one of the trait that you observe in a good scientist. Okay, he does it for the sake of it. So now, if you have, you know, if one studies the philosophical gamut of Sri Madhvacharya, all the texts, one can see that he is one of the rare philosophers who has tried to consolidate all the ideas in all the, you know, texts, the Sanatana Dharma texts that are out there, starting from Vedas, Upanishads, Puranas, and Tantra Shastras, and Ramayana, Mahabharata, Itihasa. You take anything, okay. So he says that, you see, there is a common thread that is going towards all of it, okay. And once he made this claim, such a big responsibility and challenge fell on his head, because if somebody makes a claim that everything that is there in every text has a, you know, has a connecting thread towards everything, so the burden of proof or the burden of evidence comes on the person who makes such a claim, because it's not an easy claim to make. It's an extremely difficult claim to make, and he makes that claim. And again, you know, even that claim is backed by all the evidences. You know, there's one famous Upanishad saying, सर्वे वेदाः सर्वे घोषाः एकेव व्याहृतिः. So he sticks on to that Upanishad Vakya, and he takes up that challenge of showing that the entire gamut of the Sapta Shivas, you know, that is said in Vedas, all Sanatana Dharma texts speak in one voice. Okay, so it's such a big responsibility, and he successfully takes up that responsibility and shows that it is indeed the fact that all the, you know, texts speak in one language, which actually, you know, takes me to the other issue. You see, there is one other nice thing that has been said about his personality and his works in his biography, which is Samuddra Vijaya, where the biographer Narayana Panditacharya says this. He says, Rupamanyadiva Dhanyamatmanaha. So his work is a reflection of his personality. It is true with all authors, right? I mean, so you read somebody, you know, and you make a picture of what their personality is. So the same thing about goes for Madhvacharya also. Rupamanyadiva Dhanyamatmanaha. So his entire work is considered to be his, you know, a reflection of his personality. So all these traits that I'm talking about his work, because I have not definitely seen him, right? But if you look at his work and, you know, study it without without any bias, with an unbiased mind, you can definitely understand what kind of personality it is. And the other thing that I have observed is the Arjava, okay, which is the non-contradictory nature of things. I mean, I'll actually make this challenge to people. If anybody can show me a single contradiction in what he says in any of his work, right? So, you know, I will give them some cash prize or something. It is extremely difficult to find a contradiction in what he says. He's so consistent in what he says that none of the two claims that he has made in all of his works speak in different voice. Okay, so it is completely non-contradictory nature. I see that the people have questions in chat box, so I'll just speak for 5 more minutes and I'll address those questions one by one. Okay, so I'll do that. So the non-contradictory nature, the Arjava, right? I mean, he never speaks in two languages. He never, two voices. He never makes contradictory claims in two different works that he does. It's so consistent. I mean, everything that he says in one work is consistent with the other. This is another scientific thing, right? I mean, you don't contradict with the existing work and you don't contradict with your own work and so on. So this is one other thing. So yeah, I mean, I can go on. Maybe I'll just talk about one more thing and stop. Let me just see. Made a small notes of what it is. Yeah. So two more points. See, one is he has this habit of presenting things in a no-nonsense approach. Okay. So what I mean by it is the following. So there is something called multiplicity of assumptions in science, where so when you are putting forward some theory, right, the lesser assumptions that you make, the better it is. Correct? A theory that makes lesser assumptions. So suppose there are two theories, theory A and theory B. If theory B makes lesser assumptions to theory A and both are making the same hypothesis, then theory B is considered to be a better theory. Okay. So now, Acharya Madhva, in all of his work, right? I mean, he makes such less assumptions, such a no-nonsense approach. Where okay, so there are two things. He adopts the ideas that are already there. Okay, so he is not so adamant that he just refutes anything that has come before. For example, right, the idea of Vishnu Sarvottamatva, the idea of Veda Purushayatva, and all these ideas that were there before. For example, the Advaita philosophy very well acknowledges the fact of Veda Purushayatva, and he acknowledges it. There is no contradiction there. Okay, there is no bone of contention there. So now he adopts anything that is already there, which is essential, right? And at the same time, wherever he deviates, he does not shy away from deviating. Okay, I was talking of no nonsense approach, right? So he does not adopt things just for the sake of adapting them. For example, when people say that Vyavahare Nyaya Nayaha, so whenever this entire Tattvavada, the philosophy of Madhvacharya was developed, he has adapted a lot of ideas from Nayayikas. I mean, the epistemological ideas, even though that's a debatable issue because he developed a new kinds of epistemology, but one can say that that he adapted a lot of epistemological ideas from Nayayikas. So now, while he adopted those ideas of Nayayikas, he followed a no-nonsense approach where he warded off all the nonsensical things that were there in their epistemological approach also. I can give you a concrete example here. So in the Nayayikas, or the proponents of Nyaya Siddhanta, they have this weird rule that there is this thing called Panchavayava Niyama. Okay, so when they make an inference, a little bit of details, but I'll go to that. So when they make this inference, inference is called to be one of the three pramanas, three sources of evidence, or they call it anumana. There, they make a rule, they make an assumption that that there should be 5 avayavas or 5 parts when you make an inference, and if one of the parts is just taken away, then it will not become a valid inference. So Acharya ridicules this and he says that this is not a strict rule, and he shows multiple evidences where Panchava Niyama is not required. So now, so this is multiplicity of assumptions. There is no need to just stick to a stupid rule and just carry that stupid rule all along the way and say that, you know, that you have to stick to this rule, right? I mean, wherever, if there is a rule, if there is something that is required, you do it. If it's not required, you don't have to do it always. Okay, so this is the nonsensical approach. And people are going to talk about his other facets. But while he developed philosophy, there is one other thing that he did, which I think is scientific. Never ever in any of his works he has taken any personal names when he is refuting the other philosophies. Okay, so you can look at all of his works. Not even once he refers to individuals and makes personal comments on it. No, I'm not talking about the other people, his disciples and all that. That is a different matter of discussion. But never, not even once in Acharya Madhva's work, you find a personal remark. Okay, so he is very clear about his philosophy. So whenever he has to make a philosophical point, he takes, they call it the Tatvika issues, right? Whenever there is a bone of contention between the other thing, it is the duty of a true philosopher or a scientist to discuss other philosophies and put forward his views with evidence. That he does, but not even once he takes personal names. He takes names, he makes personal remarks on people. This is actually a very nice precedence that he has set. And barring a very lot of the other Vyakhyanakaras, for example, Sri Vyasatirtha, even though when he writes his work, Nyayamrita, where he refutes the Advaita Siddhanta to a large extent, he never takes, in the entire work, he never takes a personal name. Okay, so it's such a nice precedence that is set by Sri Madhvacharya, which is very, very scientific and very, very rigorous and followed all over the world even today. I think with that, I shall stop and maybe take questions. I had a few more things to discuss, but yeah. So okay. So one last point. You might have a question that one very prevalent trait of which is there in scientific community is that they keep changing their ideas whenever they make a different observation. They keep changing their ideas. Has Madhvacharya done anything of that sort? No. Okay, so he has not done that. The answer is no, he has not done that, because the belief is that he's a ruju, right? I mean, he doesn't make mistakes. Okay, so if audience can believe that he cannot make mistakes, barring for that one trait, where he changes his own ideas based on observations, you can find all the traits that a good scientist has, right, in developing his philosophy in Acharya Madhva when he develops his philosophy in his work. Okay, so it is in a true sense that it is he is ruju, and so are his works. So non-contradictory, no nonsensical, so much backed with evidence and so on. With this sense, I started my lecture with a nice shloka that is praising Acharya Madhva. It is composed by none other than his beloved student Sri Jayatirtha in his magnum opus Nyayasudha, where he compares Acharya Madhva to an inference. It's a very nice shloka where he compares the Acharya Madhva to an inference. Vyaptiriyasya nije nijena mahasa pakshe sapakshe sthitihi. I'll not go to the details. The summary is that he says that how Acharya Madhva is a non-fallible inference, or non-fallible anumana. He gives what good qualities an anumana should have. So he says that all of those qualities Acharya Madhva also has. He has Vyapti, he has. Where is the, okay, maybe I'll just take 5 minutes and explain. It's a very nice shloka. Yasya vyaptihi vyaptiriyasya nije nijena mahasa pakshe sapakshe sthitihi. So for an inference, there is a part of inference called vyapti. So he says that Acharya Madhva has vyapti everywhere, all kinds of shastras. I just mentioned that he is one of the very rare acharyas who has dealt with all kinds of texts and showed that there exists a thread of consistency there. Pakshe sapakshe sthitihi vyavrittischa vipakshatotha vishayi. So I said an anuman or an inference should not be there in vipaksha. So in the case of Acharya, he says that he never makes mistakes. So he never gets affiliated to wrong ideas. He always sticks to right ideas. पक्षे नैवास्ति प्रतिपक्षयुक्तिरतुलं शुद्धं प्रमाणं समे. Right. See, one other thing is, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Acharya Madhva encourages questioning to such a deep extent, where in very, very rare quotation that he has given, citation that he has given in Bhagavata Tatparya, which astonished me actually. What he says is that when there is a conversation that is going between a guru and a shishya, suppose a shishya makes asks questions, okay, and suppose he asks questions that are against the siddhanta. It's natural, right? I mean, somebody asks a question, so he gives a citation which says that the stronger the questions are, which is against the tattva, okay, the more punya the shishya gets. Okay, so isn't it amazing? He says that because the stronger the questions are, the strong the questions are, the stronger the answer should be. Correct? Right? The more strength the questions are, the strength of the answer should be more than that. So he says one should very fiercely ask questions. Never shy away from asking questions. He says tasmat sarvatra jignaset. One has to ask questions in everything. Never ask questions. Okay. So this encouragement to asking questions is one of the very nice trait that you can observe in almost all Indian philosophy, more so in Acharya Madhva's text. Okay, so in that sense, to conclude, as I told you, you can take any of the existing body of literature in modern science, and if you look at the approach that has been taken by that, and the approach that Sri Madhvacharya takes in his philosophical development, you can see that okay, exactly the same at a level of abstraction. They have tread the exact same path in putting forward their ideas. One can question their ideas and all that. That is a different debate. But the way the presentation and the the development of thought is it can be as scientific as it can be. So I hope that I've tried to be a little scientific in trying to put forward my claim that his works, his philosophical rendering is scientific. And with that, I'll stop and let the Antaryami of Sri Madhvacharya get pleased from whatever lecture I gave. Okay, so yeah, so I'll stop here. Maybe I'll take some questions. There are already a few questions. Let me try to answer them one by one. Dr. Srinidhi, shall we do that?
Yes.
Okay.
So the first question we have from S.V. Ramanan. He says that what is the similarity between the Sankhya philosophy and Tattvavada school of Madhvacharya? Both are dualistic, as Madhvacharya commented on Sankhya or refuted it as Shankaracharya.
So I mean, the question is very valid, but I don't see the context of that question in this particular lecture. Nevertheless, I'll answer it in brief. See, the similarities in that level where both are dualistic, as you rightly said, both agree that there is Satya Bheda and all that. Other than that, there is not too much philosophy. They say that Prakriti Karti Purushastu Pushkara Palashavat Nirliptaha. So we don't say that, even though we assume, even though Madhvacharya agrees that Prakriti has a role in this world in terms of the Upadana Karana. It is the Paramachetana does everything, right? So there are significant differences. That is for another day's discussion. He has commented on Sankhya in the Avirodhadhyaya of Brahma Sutra. It is in detail. You have a fair bit of discussion in the Anuvyakhyana and the corresponding Nyaya Sudha. Okay. So the next question is from.
So the next question we will take one question from each. So next question we have from Raghuramachar. So he said, I do find concept of experience considered as important in perceiving truth. It is good for the Jiva Paramatma Bheda and stuff. But my question is, if we were to consider experience, most have really bad or silly experience. If these experiences are to use, then it would lead to illusion, and most of us live in a such illusion. How would you tackle this observation with emphasis on experience?
Extremely good question. I congratulate Dr. Raghuram for asking that question. Very, very relevant question, right? I mean, it's true, right? I mean, of course, our experiences are silly. If he can unmute himself, we can actually have a conversation now.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible now. See, that's very true. What you said is very true. Can you give an example for that? Having a silly experience.
In the Shastra, we know that this, right? That whatever we observe, like
Yeah, sometimes we experience.
Sarparajju, the same concepts.
Yeah.
If we talk philosophically, otherwise also in terms of any conversation which we have among people, or the relationship issues, or be it anything like ಅವ್ನು ನಂಗೆ ಹಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡ್ದ ನನಗೆ ಕೆಟ್ಟದ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರ್ಬೋದು, some observations. So whatever we experience out of our limited minds would always lead to a bad thought in our mind and limitations in our thoughts. So if we consider all those, or we accumulate all those silly thoughts, then we will never go beyond the point where we'll cross these illusions of the materialistic life whatsoever.
Sure. The question is very valid. It is very good. So the question is that if we base our entire philosophy, this is a very strong point, that the other philosophers make.
Dr. Pradosh, sorry to interrupt, but your audio is now you are not visible now.
Yeah, I just I had to switch off my video. Yeah, but am I audible?
Yes, you can continue. Yes.
I'm audible, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. See, what I was saying is, this is one big question that is put forward by the other schools of philosophy. It says if you base your philosophy on experience, then as he rightly pointed out, there are so many silly experiences or falsifiable experiences that one has, right? So why do you base your philosophy on experience? It's a very valid question. So here is an answer. Let me ask you a counter question on that, and then I'll tell you the answer. I mean, my opinion on the question. See, it is like asking this. You make a hypothesis in science, okay? And then you start experimenting, okay? So what if our experiments are wrong? Okay. See, what if our equipments are wrong? What if we do a bad experiment? What do we do? So now, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that make any damn hypothesis and suit your experiments to suit the hypothesis, or is it the other way around?
No. See, in terms of the scientific community, I do understand that. For example, if you go for an instrumentation or something, there is something like there is a calibration, but how good is
exactly
the calibration?
Exactly. So now what is my understanding of Acharya Madhva's philosophy is that you start with your experience, okay, and then you go to see, this is how you do. So you start with a hypothesis, okay, and go do some experiments, okay, and now you change your hypothesis based on your experience, so based on your experiments, right? And then re-hypothesize and re-experiment and keep doing it, right? This is how you do it. See, now what Madhvacharya says is the same thing, that you start with an experience and look at the Shastras from the light of experience. Okay, is it contradicting? If it's contradicting, go back to your experience and question your experience. See, what he says is the final judgment or the final emphasis is final call is based on experience. In fact, you took the example of the rope serpent.
Correct. This is what I was about to tell, because yes, I was like ardently listening to whatever you were saying. Yes, this is what I was about to ask initially, but I just modified the question, just sticking on to the experience. Am I stopping you in between? If you want to continue, then
yeah, let me finish. So you took the example of rope serpent, right? See, how do you know that it's a bad experience? See, you said that it's a silly experience, and how do you know that? It is through another experience, isn't it?
Correct.
Right. But see, now if I question the other experience, what do you do?
Yes, exactly.
Right. Sakshi Siddhe. See, you need a termination point.
Yes. Right? And I feel that at this termination point, the experience would be more valid than the experience which is happening at the initial stages.
No question about it. No, I mean, now that you know philosophy, I can take some jargons. I'm not talking about the vritti jnana when I talk about experience. I'm talking about the sakshi jnana itself.
Okay.
Right. So when Acharya quotes a lot of Brahmatarka vachanas in one of his works called Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya, where Brahmatarka uses the word anubhava, and anubhava is only reserved to the sakshi jnana. There are a few set of non-falsifiable anubhavas. Okay, so now the claim of Sri Madhvacharya is start from that and then build your philosophy. Never build a philosophy that contradicts your anubhava. See, in that sense, it's very practical. No, you think about it. We all talk about God and we all talk about so many atindriya things and all that. I mean, I can speak for myself. I have zero experience. I have zero anubhava of any of them. All my knowledge is bookish. Okay, so I mean, it's as good as someone else. No, he just told me. I mean, when he was introducing, he said that I've studied this. Anybody can do it given some 10 years of time. What's big deal, right? So now the point is the anubhava, right? I mean, all the knowledge, all your bookish thing terminates and culminates only when you have the anubhava. Right? Even Upanishad says that Chiyante vidyate chidyate hridaya grantihi chiyante chasya karmani tasmin drishte paratmani. Only when you experience, these things end. But look at this. He says that keep questioning, keep experiencing, question your experience also, right? I mean, there is no rule that you can't question your experience, but there will be a stage where you will hit a point where you don't even have the need of questioning your experience. That is what the anubhava is. You see? In that sense, he bases his philosophy on experience. Okay, so I hope I gave you some pointers on that. So yeah, so any other question?
There is one actually, not a question. It's not a question. It's a question from Ramanan himself. So he says that how do we interpret the Mahavakyas of Upanishads in the light of Advaita interpretation and Madhva's interpretation of the same to establish a dualistic school? Can you take one example to establish a Dvaita philosophy? So this question actually can be answered in next session, which will be delivered by Dr. Raghavendra Acharya Rachuri, and his concept is his title is that the contribution of Madhvacharya to the world of philosophy, world of Veda. So he will address this question, I think. So we are left out of questions. So many people may have many questions now, but you may have not asked some questions because we have a time bound here. So as
Srinidhi Acharya, if you don't mind, I had a question. So can I ask a question to Prathosh?
Go on, please.
Yes.
So Prathosh, to ask you a question. So basically, a lot of the modern science, the work that is happening in the modern science is like the research that happens. Most of it is actually converted to technology. So and the purpose of technology, as you know, is for the betterment of human life. So when we are talking about the scientific approach of Madhvacharya, what are your thoughts that what is the technological contributions of Sriman Madhvacharya, and do you think there was a technological development or using the scientific knowledge? Were there any technologies developed, or I mean, they didn't work on those lines? So I mean, they didn't take that path of actually converting science to technology, or there were efforts made?
So I mean, the answer to this question is, at least my opinion, is the following, right? Science is not the Western science that we know of, but however, the objective of both these schools is the same, which is the betterment of human life, as you rightly said. If you look at it, it's not about Madhva's philosophy. If you look at all these schools of philosophy, Indian schools of philosophy, they say that the betterment of human lives, okay, does not lie in materialistic comforts. That's a very blanket statement that all philosophies, Indian philosophies agree. Sorry. So in fact, they say that the more you pursue the materialistic advancement, the more bitterness you are going to get. Yattadagre vishamiva pariname amrutopamam. Yattadagre amrutamiva pariname vishopamam. Quoting Bhagavad Gita. So the very fundamental tenet, one may question that, okay, one may very well question that, but the fundamental tenet is that the more materialistic you go, the lesser happiness you get. Okay. So now once you make this statement, there's no need for people to pursue that, take that route at all. So my personal opinion is that while the ideas that they presented mostly concerned to the Achantika Sukha, or the ultimate betterment of human soul, rather than the worldly materialistic benefits of it. So at least this is my personal opinion, that they were of course capable. That's what my belief is, but they deliberately did not take up that path, because they knew that taking that path will deviate us from the very goal that we have by the very assumption. So now one can question that assumption. How good is that? We have this gadget, that gadget. Without any gadget, how could we even have this lecture today, right? If you go and ask Madhvacharya, probably he would say that, who asked you to have this gadget? Life was much better than that. I'm just taking a guess. Okay. So people, any Indian philosophers did not take that route of looking for human betterment from a materialistic standpoint. Rather, they looked at reducing the materialistic comforts and looking at the so-called Achantika Sukha. Yeah. Okay, I think that's for the day today. Shriji, should we conclude? Yeah.
Yes, we will conclude. So, of course, as you all felt, I also felt that the session was very interactive and very thoughtful, and many questions. Now we have more questions in our mind. So that is actually the fruit of the lecture. Should be not delivering a lecture. Actually, it must rise some questions in your mind that you will follow that questions and try to find an answer, and again you will have more questions and more answers like that. It must be a continuation of lecture. Lecture must continue after the lecture also. That should be that I personally consider a good lecture. So in that sense, this was one of the good lectures I have heard recently. So I wholeheartedly thank Dr. Pratosh, as I can say him, Pratosh Acharya, because he knows both. He is in both. He is the one thing is that he actually work in IIT, but he does not skip his religious whatever need to be done, religious acharana and all those things. He never fails. Actually, he does all those things. So somehow it is very difficult to find that balance between religious duties and working in IIT kind of institution and managing to study both Shastra and technology simultaneously. So that for that we are very happy and we are very blissful to have such kind of a person in our Madhva community. So with that comment, I hope this session was very fruitful. Tomorrow, Dr. Raghavendra Acharya Rachuri will deliver his lecture. And please, I hope everyone, whoever has joined today, will join tomorrow. And this is an effort, and this effort will continue. This is someone said that we should conduct more and more these kind of dialogues. So I say this is dialogue because dialogue must be there, and because the Western philosophy started from dialogue, as you know. So actually Indian philosophy also started from dialogue itself, but now we are a little bit deviated from that route. So again, we should now bring young people and many young scholars and experience of scholars, which will take us to that path again. So with that hope, and with in this hope, I think Pujya Guruji of Pejavar Swamiji, Shri Vishwaprasanna Tirtha Swamiji and Vishwesha Tirtha Swamiji's grace will be there for all of us. With that conclude, I will end this program.
And
Let
also,
us
I
meet
thank
tomorrow.
I thank Srinidhi Acharya and Purnapurna Samshodhana Mandira for this wonderful opportunity. Only when you share your thoughts, you get some clarity. If you did find some merits in my lecture, it's all thanks to my gurus and acharyas, and of course I'm sure there are a lot of mistakes in what I presented. So yeah, so I beg your pardon for that, and thanks a lot again. So we are approaching Madhyanami, and let Acharya bless all of us.
Yes, let
Yeah.
bless all of us. I will conclude this session now. Shri Krishna.
Okay. Okay.